morning. How's everyone going? How's everyone doing today? Hi, bud. I'm Nick Jennison. This is Otto, and we're here with Permaculture to do a daily vlog. It's actually just starting to sprinkle, so we might get a little bit wet this morning, but you know, that's okay. I'm not too concerned with that. It seems like it shouldn't be a heavy downpour, and it's actually honestly kind of nice to work in a little bit of sprinkle. It keeps you cool here in the tropics. Today we're going to talk about the permaculture principle of obtain a yield. It's called obtain a yield. It's a pretty basic one to understand, the permaculture principle, obtain a yield, because it's just written right there. Obtain a yield, basically. Get something from the project you're working on that is actually beneficial to you. In a way, it's a motivation. That's kind of how I see it. It's a motivation to actually do the work. Because if you're putting in all this work, all this time into trying to grow a garden, for instance, and you never actually get to harvest from that garden, you're no longer going to have the motivation to actually go and keep working. Because it takes a lot of work to really get a garden up and running and make sure nothing is going to be eating it all, and make sure that, you know, if you have chickens, they don't get into your garden and destroy it. So it's a lot of work to actually maintain the garden and actually to get a yield. So actually having that goal of obtaining a yield is really important, I think. So let's take a look around the homestead, see a couple ways that I'm trying to obtain a yield here, and we'll just talk about it along the way. And let's get going. So we're heading into the chickens now. Chickens are a pretty are a great example of obtaining a yield, because they give so many different types of yields that they lend themselves well to this example. The chickens are a great example in terms of obtaining a yield, because they give many. One of them's obviously eggs. One of them's meat, if you're doing meat production with your chickens. Another is manure, and that manure could be a negative kind of yield if you're not thinking about actually using it. But here in my system, I want to be producing compost with my chicken system to obtain that yield as well. And on this small property that we're on here, I don't have much land to actually do that in. So I'm trying to combine different elements of my design to actually be able to produce all the yields that I really want here. So the manure combines with all this deep bedding that I added the other day, which I've been needing to do for a while. So the other day, after harvesting a bunch and cleaning up down the bottom of the property, I added into here all the scraps. This is leaf. There's a huge diversity of materials here. There's leaf litter, there's grass litter, there's some woody bits that'll slowly break down. I'll continue to break up as this thing continues to mature. And the chickens are going to be mixing all their manure from their coop here, and when they sleep at night, and also just as they're wandering through the day near the water. They're going to take that manure, they're going to scratch it into this bedding material. We give them food scraps and we throw it right on the bedding, and they're going to eat some of that and scratch the rest of it in. And they're going to end up producing essentially a starting material for a compost pile. So that's my yield with the beginning of this system. The chickens, plus their manure, plus all the bedding material here, becomes this beautiful starter for a compost pile. Then all I have to do is take that material as a yield, build into a compost pile, and then the chickens continue that work for me. So by the end of this line of chicken run here, I'll actually get a yield of compost, and that all came from what could be regarded as waste materials, as stuff that I've hacked down from the property, from food scraps that we no longer want, from the manure here that oftentimes just gets piled up and causes problems. So you can obtain a yield from pretty much anything on your property as long as you kind of design the system correctly and you know what that yield that you're looking for is. Right now we only get 2 eggs a day because we only have 2 hens. They are laying pretty much every day, which is pretty cool, but we're only getting 2 eggs a day. We would like more than that, but let me tell you, being able to come out here and harvest even 2 eggs a day and go in there and put them right on the frying pan for breakfast, that is a great yield. It makes me feel really good. If you are doing meat production, we had 2 excess roosters here because we had an original batch of 6 baby chicks that we got, and we ended up having 3 roosters out of that batch. So we only need 1 in this tiny backyard system, and we don't really even need 1. I just like to have a rooster in my flock. I just think it promotes better kind of flock health overall. So those excess roosters we actually used as a yield, and we harvested them and we used them for the meat. all the feathers came back in here and were put into a compost pile. All the excess remains and innards that we weren't going to be eating ourselves came in here, went into a compost pile. And then after we cooked it, we obviously had the meat. We also made bone broth with the bones and everything. And then all that excess bone went in here into a compost pile and is now being returned to the land. So a chicken that was here, that manured here, that scratched throughout here, is now being returned into the land through that compost, and it just keeps that nutrient cycling. So obtaining that yield in the chickens, I advocate for chicken systems just because it's a really easy way to get many yields out of one small system that will essentially continue that fertility loop on your property. Now, there's also the obvious yield of food. So we have tomatoes here. We've been harvesting probably for about 3 weeks at this point, 3 or 4 weeks, and we have a lot more on. Nice green tomatoes coming on. This one's starting to ripen up. And so I actually harvested from this garden, from our garden here, for our Mother's Day dinner last night. I made the salad for the dinner, and I harvested the 100%, not 100%, the majority of the salad from the land. So I did sweet potato leaves as a green, great yield, and this is also going to be yielding us root crops, but that's going to be many months in the future. So until then, I can use the greens as a yield. I actually used sunflower seeds. They were not ours, but you can see here we had the potential for them to be ours. I used that in the salad. I also harvested greens from our property for the salad. So we got arugula back here, we got some bok choy, we got some baby kale, lettuce, of course, into the salad, and this is the New Zealand spinach. Now this is a perennial green that grows well in tropical climates, apparently. So far so good. And it was delicious. First time I actually harvested it for a salad. So talking about yields, a yield doesn't necessarily have to be food. It doesn't necessarily have to be something that you're actually taking from your garden and using immediately. It can just be beauty. It can be something that's providing a benefit to your actual garden. So here, I'm actually growing flowers mainly for beauty. I want to be able to come pick flowers for my lady if she's having a bad day, or just walk out here and enjoy the beauty of these flowers. So I planted a variety of flowers here, some of them edible, like the nasturtium down here. So this is also an edible yield for us, both the petals and the flower. It's not doing great here, but it is producing. The flowers will actually attract beneficial insects like pollinators and predator insects, the ones that eat the insects that I don't want here, like aphids. We also got zinnias coming up. These guys will be great for attracting butterflies and bees to the property. So I'm actually using this little garden that's at the base of this baby avocado here as essentially a insect attractor to my property. I want to make sure that I have that yield. I want to make sure that I have a yield of pollinators to my property in order to pollinate all my other fruits and veg, so I can get a yield there. So I'm allowing space to plant for nature and plant for wildlife in order to get that yield of fruit from my other plants. Now, talking about here in the tropics, if you can produce bananas, that is always going to be an amazing yield. Great fruits, so useful in so many different ways, both bananas and plantains. You can do so much with them, and they can be essentially be a staple crop, especially here in the tropics. Super easy to grow here. But each banana tree only produces one rack of bananas. So once that's done, the rest of the tree is no longer usable. So what can we do with that? We can obtain a yield. So all these greens and the leaves can become a great starter material for compost piles. So I use them for compost piles a lot. And this trunk here can end up being cut up and used as a really big bulky mulch, which is what I did here. Now these aren't bananas. I think this is more the native kind of banana tree. It's not actually, it doesn't produce bananas, but it's just like a wild in the same family. But you can actually cut up banana trees nice and small and use them as edging of the garden beds, put them around the plants you want to grow. And this big bulky mulch, especially here in the tropics, since I've added compost and added this bulky mulch, I've seen much better production in this garden bed already. And it's only been about a week since, or not even a week since I added the mulch, but about a week since I added the compost here. So just think about how you can obtain yields, and it doesn't always necessarily have to be a food, you know? It doesn't have to be a yield that you're physically using for yourself. It can be a yield of beauty. It can be a yield of mulch for your garden. There's so many different options here. For example, over here, these wild canna lilies that just grow on our property and grow right here. This is a small little bed that's on the other side of our bathroom here. So all of our shower water and sink water goes into this little bed, and then we're just producing these canna lilies here. And these guys grow abundantly. I don't have to do a single thing to make them grow. And what's nice about it is the chickens love them. If you didn't see the video on using weeds as feed for chickens, check it out. I'll link to it above in the little card there. But these guys are actually a great feed for my chickens. My chickens love it, and I don't have to do a single thing here. So I could sit here and try to fight this and get rid of them because they're constantly growing and they're bulky and they keep going and going. But instead of that, I'm choosing to use them as a feed for my chickens so I can keep them in production and obtain that yield of feed, so I can spend less money on actually, buying food for my chickens, and just use that money for doing other things to benefit my garden. It's also time, If I can just harvest food there and I don't have to go out and find feed and bring it back and all that, if I can just do it right here on my property, that's a huge benefit. Another yield I want to talk about is, and we kind of mentioned it already, but essentially mulch. Mulch is a great yield. Here in the tropics, we have such abundant growth of grass, just because of all the sun and moisture that we get, that it can become a problem if you don't keep harvesting it and keep it to a kind of low level. It can just essentially take over an entire garden. And once those seed heads start producing, it can just get out of hand. So what I like to do is, when I do find a big old clump of grass that is ready, about this size or smaller even, it'd probably be even better if it's a little bit smaller, but I harvest it and I end up using it for mulch, or I use it for a compost starter. These are great for mulch because I can chop it all up. It doesn't last too long in the garden, so it's great for like starting mulch material if I'm direct seeding, or I just put transplants in and I want them to have a little bit of room to breathe for a little bit. I'll use this to start with, and then I'll go in and put that bulky mulch like the banana trunks onto the garden, and that'll help kind of protect it longer term. So in an earlier video last week, or this week at some point, I had taken the time to clean up this little area down here below my mom's house. This whole area, there's a lot of overgrowth up here. I mentioned this a couple times already, but all the bulk material from that I ended up piling here, and then a couple days ago I took that and added it with straw, or hay or straw. I actually can never remember the difference, even though I've looked it up so many times. I believe straw has seeds and hay doesn't. Either way, I got a bale of straw and I mixed it in with all of the material, with all this kind of bulky leafy material and grassy material and all that, and this is going to end up becoming a yield of compost starter that the chickens are going to help me prepare. We mentioned that earlier, but the chickens here, they do so much work. They are a great yield of eggs and potentially meat, but they're also a yield of hard work on my farm that I don't have to do, and I like that. If I can relegate work to other people to do, or other animals to do for me, that just means I can spend more time doing other things in the garden. Another great yield I want to talk about, and I'm going to stay over here because the sun's coming out, or two yields I should talk about. One is actually having good audio for my videos here. The last take I did here, my audio cut out about halfway through, and the audio, my backup audio from my phone, it was too cluttered today. So I'm basically reshooting this video. So a great yield for me to attempt to have every time I'm out here doing this vlog for you guys is actually a high quality vlog material. So I'm not going to sit here and produce something that I hate listening to, because I just can't stand it. I don't want you guys to have to sit there and listen to all the background wind noise and everything. So I'm out here shooting the exact same vlog for the second time today, and that's because I want a yield of high quality content for you guys. So that's what I'm doing here. Okay, I think the clouds are going to cover up so I can go back into this direct sun for a little bit. Another yield that I think is really important for everyone to start thinking about is seeds, a seed yield. So using open pollinated or heirloom varieties of plants allows you to then collect those seeds and then reuse them for next year, and they should stay true as long as you don't have too many different varieties. And seed saving is a whole science and a whole kind of profession there. So I'll try to leave some resources in the show notes below. So below every show, below every of these YouTube videos, there's a little, comment section and everything, but there's also a video description. Click show more. I usually leave links to a variety of helpful things for you that we talked about during the show, and also just kind of a written description of what we're going over in this show if you just want a quick glance through it to see what I'm going to be talking about. But I'll leave some links down there about seed saving and some basics for you. But I allow my lettuces here to go to flower to then produce seeds. And last week I harvested seeds from the garden. And I believe I actually have a couple of videos of that, so I'll just attach that in here while I'm talking about it. But I just took the seeds from the actual plants that were growing and they were ready once they kind of get to the point where they're ready to harvest. I harvested those seeds, and then I'm going to end up resowing them. What's nice about harvesting seeds from your land is that it starts to get adapted. The genetics start to get adapted to your land. So if you have a lettuce plant that does really, really well on your property, and you have that open pollinated variety or that heirloom variety where you can actually save those seeds and it'll stay true, try to save the seeds from like your earliest producing, best tasting lettuce, because that's telling you that it's going to produce a good yield on a regular basis because it's well adapted to your site. And if you can obtain a yield of seed from that lettuce, then you're going to be set for a long time, because if you can keep producing lettuce and you don't have to go buy lettuce all the time, then that continuous yield, because you're producing seed, because you have that seed yield, you're going to have continuous lettuce yield, and then that just keeps going and going. If you can get into a cycle where you're saving your seeds, you're replanting them, that seed is going to keep getting more and more adapted to your site and keep giving you bigger and bigger yields. So obtaining a yield there, very important. Another thing about obtaining a yield is I think we've talked about this a couple times, but it doesn't have to be a physical thing. It can be beauty, right? It can also be knowledge. Knowing that this variety or this type of plant grows really well on your property, that's really, really beneficial knowledge. And knowledge is a form of a yield. Having that knowledge should then take on to next time. If I noticed that cucumbers do not grow well on my garden, or cucumbers do not grow well next to tomatoes. That's a pretty commonly well-known thing. But I did it anyway just because I like to try things, and I found that all my cucumbers next to those tomatoes died. So I go, okay, I could have listened and used that knowledge that I had as a resource, but I actually got to physically obtain that yield of, my cucumbers did not do well next to my tomatoes. So I can now note that and obtain that yield of knowledge and use it in the future. So a lot of people have this misconception in permaculture that it's about setting up a garden so you don't have to work, so you don't have to do the maintenance, so you don't have to, it's basically lazy gardening, right? It's just not the case. It's not the case. If you're doing major production and you want to make sure that you're getting a yield every single time, you need to put in the time to actually maintain that system and help it grow and just be able to interact with it. If it needs something, if it needs some water, or if it's having a stressful day, if it's really hot and it's sun stressed or water stressed, you need to be able to recognize those and actually get out there and do the work. So obtaining the yield is really a motivation for you. It's kind of like you're competing against the element. You're competing against the cat that keeps wanting to come out here and use this area right here underneath this little baby papaya. He keeps wanting to use this area right here as his little fertilizer manure kind of depot, but that's right next to my little baby watermelon. So I had to constantly be out here making sure when I let him out here, I keep watching him. And anytime he comes near here, I have to be reinforcing the fact that, no, don't be destroying my garden here like you did my little cantaloupes that you did over here. It's okay to, you don't want to just not let your cats or your kids or anything into the garden, because they have to learn too, and they're part of your life, right? But if you can find a way to help that yield, that fruit, in this case the watermelon, make it all the way to its maturity so you can actually get that yield, that's going to be so much more of a motivational thing for the future for you to actually continue growing your own food. If you can say, this watermelon came from my garden and I made sure it made it from baby all the way to full production because I spent the time out in the garden. It's really a huge motivational tool for you to actually spend the time and do the work in the garden, because you're getting those yields. And remember, it can be yield of knowledge, it can be yield of beauty, it can be yield of just spending time. I like to just spend time with my chickens, so I also get the yield of just having animals in my life. I like to have animals around me all the time, so I get to have the yield of spending time with my chickens as part of my homestead. So that for me is it's a great way to think about it. It's obtaining a yield is just about how can you motivate yourself to actually get out there and do the work to get that yield. Because it's not just throw stuff in the ground and let it go and hope it works. It's, oh, okay, I'm gonna put stuff in the ground now. Oh, what does it need now? Does it need more water? Does it need more compost? Is my soil okay? Is my soil covered and mulched, and make sure that everything's okay in the soil? It's about learning what you need to do out there to make sure you're getting a yield in your garden. Having that principle of obtaining a yield really helps you stay motivated. So I highly recommend that you take the time to really understand this principle of obtaining a yield, because if you use it and you use it well, it's essentially going to help you produce much more food. It's going to help you spend more time in your garden. It's going to make you want to be out there in the garden instead of just thinking about it as a chore. If your goal and your idea and this principle of obtaining a yield is in your head, and that's something that you really want, you're never going to go out into your garden if you never get anything from your garden, right? You need to actually be motivated. So use this principle as motivation. Obtain a yield. And again, just know that if you do fail, that's not a failure, that's a yield of information for you. It's a yield of, oh, this didn't work. Why didn't that work? And learn from that. That's pretty much all I got to say today on this permaculture principle of obtaining a yield. If you do have any questions or comments, or you want more information about this, or you have a question about what I'm saying, please leave a comment in the video description or below the video description, and do check out that video description for resources. If you do like what I'm doing and you want to see more, please subscribe to the channel and share it with your community. That's the best thing you could possibly do to help me get the word out there and help me keep going with this. So yeah, until next time, guys, hope you have a great day, and we'll see you.